Hello again, everyone. Hopefully this is about imagining the possible, so it's maybe slightly not in the category, but Laurence Olivier always said that to be successful at theatre, you need a genius for practicability. Well, I'm no genius, but I'm going to be talking about a practical idea that I hope can be the foundation for maybe a lot of us to take steps to produce work together, picking up on what you've been saying, Vicky, that is less harmful to the environment. I would class myself until recently as a fellow traveller around climate emergency activism. I thought I basically understood the issues and certainly agreed that lots of the ways we produced shows in our industry were a bad thing. But thinking strategically about how to address the climate emergency while making shows was both overwhelming and, to be honest, came with a little of the depression I always suffer from when asked to believe that theatre should only be a socially activist endeavour. It's also about entertainment. Basically, I'm a clown and I want to join in too. Yes, shows about the climate emergency, what it is and what it means for life on Earth should of course continue to be encouraged, written and produced. But as we've already heard, we need to think of ways of producing shows at every scale that appeal to all audiences, not just socially engaged ones. Entertainment, musicals, comedies, adaptations, plays, new and old, also need to be created and produced in ways that do less harm environmentally. I'm talking about Green Book shows, of course. Now, some producers already have the means to create Green Book shows, but for some, let's be honest, it seems yet another financial burden amongst the blizzard of producing difficulties that surround us all. So how can we help share the resources, practical, financial, intellectual, needed to create Green Book shows across our industry and make that sharing a clear demonstration in and of itself of the need to reduce waste, to work together and to be confident in starting conversations around climate emergency. Because on top of making these Green Book shows, I think we need a way to tell audiences, as part of our responsibilities as storytellers, that the way that these wonderful pieces of entertainment have been made is deliberately less harmful to the environment. And then I think we need a way to shout about that in a way that audiences can applaud and in a way that isn't a form of cultural cod liver oil to them. How can we effectively shout about all of that and use these shows and their means of production as a way of starting these conversations with our audiences? Conversations that help create the positive paradigm change in thinking around climate emergency that is the precursor to action and real change for a much, much wider public. So this idea is, I hope, simple. An idea that combines a production model so that all resources are shared and a far higher proportion, eventually all, of all our shows across the industry are Green Book. And on top of that, an idea that is a way of making clear our environmental commitment and engaging the public in supporting these goals. Because I think we need to find a way of making even Hello Dolly a means of informing people of the climate emergency. I'm calling this idea the National Grid. The National Grid, a National Grid show, would be a Green Book show co-produced by a consortium of theatres who had signed up to be a National Grid partner. We would create and co-produce Green Book shows within this ever-expanding consortium of theatres. But only a relatively small number of theatres from the wider partnership need collaborate on any given production. The shows play across these partner co-producing theatres and then, of course, could be available to the wider partnership for touring. Each show would have a lead producer theatre where it was physically built, and then it would slow tour 4, 5, 6 of the partner theatres that had agreed to come in on that particular production. Now, a lot of the resource and knowledge is founded in our big national companies, the NT and the RSC, and this idea is, for sure, a fairly straightforward way of trying to engage those two companies in meaningful Green Book co-production that reaches across the nation and shares that resource and knowledge. Rufus, this is the ask. But the shows produced would be branded as National Grid shows, and therefore, as I've said, be a means of underlining the steps we are taking as a whole industry to meet the challenges of bringing the issue of climate emergency into the conversation at every opportunity. National Grid could become a byword for a Green Book show and all that that meant. At once a phrase that talked about energy and power and about how it was being shared or its harmful effects reduced, a phrase that could easily enter the lexicon of theatregoers and the wider public, and a brand name that spoke to people in a simple way, yet brought with it a lot of ideas and understanding. It would also be a demonstration of how to create excellence in a time of climate emergency. Cutting emissions shouldn't mean cutting spectacle, cutting fun, cutting corners. Of course, as we've all been discovering, it means thinking a little harder about how we achieve those things to reduce environmental impact at the same time. I hope the practicalities can be simple. We're already running out of time, basically, this idea of national grid can involve theatres and productions at all levels and sizes because it's a scalable idea that is about how we produce, not an artistic idea that involves agreement on show content. And that means a national grid show could be in any size of auditoria. It could involve many partners or just a few. It could be a piece of entertainment or a social drama. I'm going to give way because I've a few other things. We can talk about it later, basically. I'm going to get Susie in. Yes, oh yeah, I did really want to say this as well. Toot your bell, go on. Yeah, there we go. We can involve commercial co-producers too. We have to involve them. They're 80% of our industry. They're not our enemies. The next show I'm going to direct will be the Rep's first ever Main House Green Book production, and we're co-producing with Ambassador Theatre Group. They've readily agreed to the show being Green Book after this discussion. And I'd love it if we could put the badge National Grid on it. Thank you.
Quick. Go. Great. So one of the things we've got to address when we're talking about this national grid idea is the fact that once you start touring a show, the majority of its emissions happen once it's on wheels. The last Green Book conference I was at, there was an example given by the National Theatre Productions production manager who said they took a big show out, toured it around the country, and they calculated that each one of the 5 articulated trailers that took that show around travelled the equivalent distance between London and Brazil 5 times. It's really important that we understand the implications of that environmentally. And I think, to the NT's credit, they absolutely do. And we have to have the conversation about what the impact of that show is on the road. And how do we, in creating this new model, how do we take as little as possible with us between venues?
So, to enable this project to have minimal environmental impact, we need to re-look at all the practicalities of how we make and transfer work. We need to minimise the amount that we transfer between venues, and therefore we need to look at how we can standardise staffing structures and equipment between National Grid theatres. This may require bold new models. Do we really need to be buying our in-house kit? Could we examine models where an entire rig is hired for a season or a year, and the National Grid, and ideally all shows in that season, would utilise this equipment? We all know that if equipment isn't toured, then fit-ups will take longer. But that needs to be okay, and just built into the planning. In an ideal world, a National Grid show would use only venue lighting, sound, video, masking, drapes, laundry facilities. But that means that we need to do the work to ensure that all the venues can deliver the standard spec, which is really challenging in a time of very, very minimal funding. We also need to think about what happens to our National Grid physical assets when a show comes to an end of its life. Ideally, these shows need to be built and procured in a way that the materials can be reused for the next National Grid project, creating a circular economy, potentially requiring a shared National Grid storage solution, something that I know there's many conversations happening about already, and the biggest challenge of that being cost, but something that could maybe be built into the producing model for the National Grid. Sean? What? Are you going to say anything else?
No.
No,
time.
we'll
Talk about it later.
We're going to go.